Discipline is not built in motivation, it is built in the morning.
Morning is the most honest moment of the day. Before the world speaks to you, before expectations arrive, before your phone tells you who you are supposed to be, there is a brief window where your mind is undefended. The Stoics understood this moment better than most modern people ever will. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself at dawn not because he felt motivated, but because he knew motivation is unreliable. What you say to yourself in the morning is not encouragement, it is command. It is instruction. It is the programming that decides whether you will react to life or govern yourself within it. Most people wake up already defeated. They replay yesterday's failures. They anticipate today's stress. They tell themselves, silently, that life is heavy, unfair, exhausting. And then they wonder why their discipline collapses by noon. The Stoic never begins the day this way. He begins by choosing his inner posture. He understands that events do not shape character, judgments do. And judgments begin with words. Quiet words, repeated words. Words spoken not for comfort, but for alignment with reality. You do not need many words. In fact, too many words weaken the mind. The Stoics favored brevity because clarity lives there. A short phrase, repeated daily, cuts deeper than 1,000 scattered thoughts. These words are not affirmations in the modern sense. They are reminders of truth. They strip away illusion. They place responsibility back where it belongs on you. The first thing you must understand is this: your mind does not wake up disciplined. It wakes up neutral, and then it is claimed. Either you claim it, or the world does. There is no third option. If you do not tell yourself what matters, distractions will. If you do not define what is under your control, frustration will. This is why Stoic self-talk is not emotional, it is structural. It builds a mental frame that holds steady when pressure arrives. Consider how Epictetus began his teachings. He did not start with happiness or success. He started with control, what is up to you and what is not. Every morning, before strategy, before ambition, before even gratitude, the Stoic reminds himself of this division, because anger, anxiety, and distraction all come from the same mistake, trying to control what does not belong to you. This is where the first powerful word is born. Not as a slogan, but as a grounding force. A word that pulls your attention back from noise and places it where your power actually lives. When spoken in the morning, it sets the boundary of your mental territory. Without it, your focus leaks. Your energy scatters. Your discipline becomes fragile. But words alone do nothing unless they are believed. And belief does not come from repetition, it comes from alignment with experience. When you tell yourself a Stoic truth and then act in accordance with it, even imperfectly, your mind begins to trust you. That trust is everything. A mind that trusts its own leadership becomes calm. A calm mind becomes precise. A precise mind becomes disciplined. Most people attempt to change behavior without changing inner language. They try to work harder while still speaking to themselves like victims. They try to stay focused while mentally rehearsing excuses. The Stoics would consider this irrational. You cannot speak chaos into your mind and expect order in your actions. Morning words are the seed. The rest of the day is the harvest. There is also something deeply humbling about Stoic morning practice. It does not inflate the ego. It does not promise ease. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he would meet ungrateful, selfish, and arrogant people that day. Not to become bitter, but to become prepared. Preparation is peace. When you expect difficulty, difficulty loses its power to shock you. Anger fades when surprise disappears. This is why the Stoic morning is quiet, deliberate, and serious. Not heavy, but intentional. It is the moment you choose principle over impulse, reason over reaction, long-term character over short-term comfort. And it begins not with what you want, but with what is required of you as a rational human being. The modern world teaches you to ask, how do I feel today? The Stoic asks, how should I act today regardless of how I feel? This single shift changes everything. Feelings become weather noticed but not obeyed. Focus stops depending on mood. Discipline stops depending on motivation. You begin to move from inner authority instead of emotional demand. The words you tell yourself in the morning must reflect this authority. They must remind you that you are not here to be entertained by life, but to meet it with virtue. That your task is not to control outcomes, but to control your conduct. That your peace does not come from easy days, but from self-mastery on hard ones. When this understanding settles in, anger loses its grip. You stop taking things personally because you no longer believe the world exists to please you. You stop being easily bothered because you have already decided what matters, and most things do not qualify. Focus sharpens not because distractions vanish, but because you stop granting them importance. This is the foundation. Without it, the rest collapses. These 5 words you will learn are not separate tricks. They are layers built on this core Stoic truth. But none of them work if this first principle is absent. Discipline is not built by force. It is built by clarity. And clarity is built every morning, one honest sentence at a time. So before the day begins, before you speak to anyone else, before you consume information, you pause. You speak to yourself as a commander speaks before battle, not to inspire fantasy, but to establish reality. You remind yourself who is in charge. You remind yourself where your power ends and where it begins. And in doing so, you reclaim your mind before the world tries to rent it from you. This is where rewiring starts. Not with intensity, but with truth. Not with emotion, but with reason. Not with many words, but with right ones. Once you accept that the morning is a moment of command, the next realization follows naturally. The mind does not resist discipline because it is weak, but because it has been trained to seek comfort. This training did not happen overnight. It happened through thousands of small permissions, snoozing alarms, delayed responsibilities, excuses spoken softly enough to sound reasonable. The Stoics would say this is not a failure of character, but a failure of attention. And attention is corrected through language. The second word you must tell yourself each morning is not gentle. It is not warm. It does not reassure you that everything will be easy. It reminds you that ease was never promised. Seneca warned that a life devoted to comfort becomes fragile, and fragile minds shatter under pressure. The Stoic does not insult himself, but he does not protect himself from truth either. He speaks plainly because plain speech builds resilience. Most people become angry not because life is hard, but because it is harder than they expected. Expectation is the silent architect of frustration. When your internal dialogue assumes smoothness, any resistance feels personal. But when your inner language prepares you for effort, resistance becomes ordinary. And ordinary difficulties do not provoke rage. They provoke response. This is why Stoic morning words are often austere. They strip away entitlement. They reset expectations. They remind you that discomfort is not a malfunction of life, but a feature of growth. The mind that accepts this does not waste energy complaining. It conserves energy for action. There is a hidden freedom in this. When you stop demanding that life be easy, you stop feeling offended by effort. Work becomes work. Fatigue becomes a signal, not an enemy. Focus improves because you are no longer negotiating with reality. You are cooperating with it. Consider how often distraction is just avoidance in disguise. You tell yourself you cannot focus, but what you really mean is that the task feels uncomfortable. The Stoics would say this is a failure to distinguish between pain and harm. Discomfort harms nothing unless you let it. Avoidance, however, corrodes character. And character erosion always shows up later as anxiety. The word you tell yourself in the morning must collapse this illusion. It must remind you that you are not harmed by effort, by boredom, or by difficulty. You are harmed only when you surrender your agency. When this becomes part of your inner language, something subtle but powerful happens. You start dramatizing tasks. You stop inflating obstacles. Focus becomes simpler because the emotional resistance weakens. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. This is not poetry. It is instruction. The obstacle is not a detour from discipline, it is the training ground of it. When you remind yourself of this in the morning, your mind stops searching for shortcuts. It commits to the path in front of it. Anger in this context is revealed as misplaced energy. It is effort aimed at the wrong target. Instead of adjusting behavior, the angry mind demands a different world. The Stoic redirects that energy inward toward refinement of response. He understands that power lies not in altering circumstances, but in choosing how to meet them. This is where focus begins to stabilize. Focus is not the ability to concentrate endlessly. It is the ability to return to what matters without resentment. When your morning words eliminate resentment, attention follows naturally. You are no longer fighting the day, you are executing it. Notice how this removes the need for constant motivation. Motivation fluctuates, principle does not. When you tell yourself in the morning that effort is expected, that difficulty is normal, that resistance is training, you no longer wait to feel ready. Readiness becomes irrelevant. Action becomes default. There is also a quiet dignity in this posture. You stop advertising your struggles, even to yourself. You do not need to be seen as strong. You simply act with consistency. Over time, this consistency reshapes identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who does not collapse under pressure. And identity, once formed, becomes self-reinforcing. This is why Stoic self-talk is not about positivity. It is about accuracy. It tells you what the day will demand, not what you wish it would offer. And paradoxically, this realism creates calm. The nervous system relaxes when it knows what to expect. Anxiety fades when ambiguity is replaced with acceptance. When you wake up and remind yourself that today will require effort, restraint, patience, and attention, you remove the shock when those moments arrive. You do not feel attacked by them. You feel prepared. Prepared minds do not panic. They respond. This second word, spoken daily, rewires your relationship with discomfort. It trains you to see challenge as neutral, not hostile, and once challenge loses its emotional charge, focus deepens. You stop fragmenting your attention with internal arguments. You do the work, then move on. By the time the day truly begins, you are no longer asking whether you feel like doing what must be done. You have already decided that feeling is not the authority. Reason is. This is the quiet strength of Stoicism. It does not shout. It does not rush. It simply removes unnecessary suffering by removing false beliefs. And as this belief settles, anger has less room to breathe. You are no longer surprised by friction. You are no longer offended by effort. You are no longer bargaining with reality. You are aligned with it. This alignment is discipline. Not rigid, not cruel, but steady. Built one morning at a time. Built with words that tell the truth. Once effort is accepted and no longer negotiated, the mind encounters a deeper challenge: control. Not control over others, not control over events, but control over interpretation. This is where most discipline collapses. People believe they fail because they lack willpower, when in truth they fail because they surrender meaning too easily. They allow every inconvenience, every remark, every delay to define their inner state. The Stoics considered this the most dangerous habit of all. The third word you must tell yourself each morning confronts this directly. It is not about force, it is about boundaries. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment you stop trying to govern what does not belong to you. And what does not belong to you is vast: other people's opinions, the pace of events, the outcomes you prefer. When you forget this, anger becomes inevitable, because you are constantly reaching beyond your jurisdiction. Most emotional exhaustion is not caused by doing too much, but by caring about too many things that are outside your command. The mind scatters itself across uncontrollable territory and focus dissolves. When the Stoic wakes up, he reclaims his borders. He reminds himself that his power is narrow, but absolute within its limits. This is not resignation. It is precision. A mind that knows exactly what it controls becomes sharp. A mind that tries to control everything becomes frantic. Discipline lives in clarity, not ambition. When you tell yourself this word in the morning, you are not shrinking your life, you are sharpening it. Consider how often anger is triggered by violated expectations of others. Someone should have acted differently. Someone should have understood. Someone should have been fair. These thoughts feel reasonable, but they are traps. They attach your peace to another person's behavior. And anything that depends on another person is unstable by nature. Marcus Aurelius warned himself daily that he would meet people who were arrogant, ungrateful, and selfish, not to grow bitter, but to remain sovereign. When you expect friction, you do not personalize it. You do not interpret it as an insult. You see it as weather, and weather does not offend you. You prepare for it. This shift alone rewires focus. When you stop scanning your environment for emotional validation, attention turns inward toward execution. You stop reacting and start choosing. And choice is the engine of discipline. The modern mind is overstimulated because it is overexposed to judgment. Notifications, opinions, comparisons, outrage, these are invitations to surrender control. Every time you accept one, your focus fractures. The Stoic response is not avoidance, but selectivity. You decide what deserves your attention, and everything else becomes background noise. This is why Stoic mornings are quiet, not because silence is virtuous, but because clarity requires space. Before the world speaks, you speak to yourself. You define the terms. You remind yourself that no external event has the authority to command your emotions without your consent. Anger fades when consent is withdrawn. You realize that irritation is not something that happens to you, but something you allow. This realization is uncomfortable at first because it removes excuses, but it also restores power. Power always comes with responsibility. Focus grows stronger here because you stop leaking energy. You are no longer emotionally investing in outcomes you cannot control. You invest instead in effort, preparation, and response. These are reliable returns. They compound. There is also a moral clarity that emerges. When you stop blaming circumstances, you stop lying to yourself. You see your reactions more honestly. You notice where impatience arises, where ego interferes, where pride demands recognition. And because you notice, you can correct. Correction is impossible without awareness. And awareness is impossible without stillness. The morning word creates this stillness. It does not silence thought, it orders it. It places each concern into its proper category. Mine, not mine. Actionable, irrelevant. Once the day begins, this ordering protects you. You move through tasks without emotional drag. Interruptions do not derail you. Criticism does not poison your mood. Praise does not inflate you. You remain centered because your center is internal. This is what the Stoics meant by tranquility. Not numbness, not withdrawal, but stability. A mind that remains intact under pressure. A mind that does not abandon itself in moments of stress. And from this stability, discipline becomes natural. You do not need to force yourself to focus. You simply remove distractions that never deserved your attention in the first place. Focus is not created, it is revealed. By the time the third word has settled into habit, mornings begin to feel different. Calmer, cleaner, less dramatic. You are no longer bracing for the day or hoping it will be kind. You are prepared to meet it as it is. And when the day meets you with resistance, disrespect, or delay, you do not react with anger. You respond with precision. Because you never gave those things authority over your inner state to begin with. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement without entanglement. And it is one of the most powerful mental positions a human being can occupy. With boundaries established and control clarified, the mind now confronts its most subtle enemy, narrative. Not the events of the day, but the stories you tell yourself about them. The Stoics understood that suffering does not come from experience itself, but from the interpretation layered on top of it. This is where discipline is either strengthened or quietly dismantled. The fourth word you must tell yourself each morning addresses this directly. It interrupts the automatic storytelling that turns neutral moments into personal dramas. Most people are not undone by facts. They are undone by meaning they assign too quickly. A delayed response becomes disrespect. A mistake becomes proof of inadequacy. Difficult morning becomes a ruined day. None of this is inevitable. It is habitual. Marcus Aurelius warned himself not to add commentary to reality. He observed that events arrive stripped of judgment, and it is the mind that decorates them with labels. When you speak this word in the morning, you remind yourself to pause before interpretation. You create a gap between stimulus and story, and in that gap, freedom lives. Anger thrives on narrative. It needs a villain. It needs intent. It needs justification. When you remove the story, anger has nothing to feed on. There is only the fact, and the fact is rarely as offensive as the tale built around it. Discipline strengthens when the mind stops rehearsing imagined slights and focuses on concrete response. This shift has profound effects on focus. When you are no longer consumed by internal commentary, attention becomes clean. Tasks stop feeling heavier than they are. Conversations lose their emotional residue. You move forward instead of replaying what already happened. Consider how much mental energy is spent reliving moments that cannot be altered. This is not reflection, it is rumination. Reflection seeks understanding. Rumination seeks validation. The Stoic abandons the second entirely. He reviews only what can be improved, then releases the rest. The morning word reminds you that replaying the past is a misuse of the present. This does not mean becoming indifferent or cold. It means becoming accurate. Emotions still arise, but they are not amplified by imagination. Disappointment remains disappointment, not catastrophe. Criticism remains information, not identity. Mistakes remain lessons, not verdicts. Modern life trains the opposite response. It rewards outrage, dramatization, and emotional display. The Stoic path is quieter and therefore harder. It asks you to resist the urge to narrate yourself a victim or hero. It asks you to simply act well. This restraint builds an internal dignity that others notice even if they cannot name it. You become less reactive, more deliberate. People sense that you are not easily provoked. And this alone changes how they interact with you. Calm becomes a form of authority. Focus sharpens further because the mind is no longer divided between what is happening and what it means. You deal with the task, not the story around the task. You listen to words, not imagined intentions. You respond to facts, not fears. There is a quiet relief in this. You no longer carry emotional baggage from moment to moment. Each situation is met fresh, not burdened by previous interpretations. This makes endurance possible. Long days feel shorter when they are not weighed down by unnecessary meaning. The Stoics believed that clarity of perception was a moral duty. To see reality as it is, without distortion, was considered an act of virtue. When you practice this in the morning, you are not just improving productivity, you are refining character. Anger dissolves here because it depends on interpretation. Remove the interpretation, and anger loses coherence. What remains is choice. And choice is manageable. Choice is disciplined. As this practice deepens, you notice how often silence is the correct response. Not because you are suppressing emotion, but because there is nothing that needs defending. Your identity is no longer tied to every outcome or opinion. You are free to let moments pass without commentary. This freedom creates space for growth. You can correct mistakes without shame. You can accept feedback without resistance. You can observe your own flaws without self-contempt. Self-awareness becomes precise instead of painful. By the time the fourth word becomes habit, mornings begin with clarity instead of tension. You are not bracing yourself against imagined problems. You are meeting the day as it unfolds, moment by moment. And when challenges appear, they are handled directly without excess emotion, not because you are detached from life, but because you are no longer enslaved by narrative. This is Stoic strength. Quiet. Controlled. Enduring. Once the mind stops fighting effort, control, and narrative, it meets something more uncomfortable than hardship, responsibility for its own direction. This is the moment most people retreat. Not because the task is too hard, but because clarity removes excuses. The fifth word you must tell yourself each morning speaks directly to this moment. It does not inspire, it demands. The Stoics believed that every human being is born with the capacity for reason, but only a few choose to exercise it consistently. Discipline, to them, was not about restriction. It was about alignment, aligning action with values, aligning attention with intention, aligning each day with the person you claim to be. Most suffering comes from misalignment. You say you value focus, yet you indulge distraction. You say you value peace, yet you rehearse resentment. You say you value growth, yet you avoid discomfort. The mind feels this contradiction, and it manifests as restlessness, guilt, and quiet self-contempt. The morning word exposes this gap not to shame you, but to close it. This is where Stoic self-talk becomes uncompromising. Not cruel, but honest. You remind yourself that no one else is responsible for the quality of your thoughts or the consistency of your actions. Circumstances influence you, but they do not govern you. You govern yourself, or you do not. This realization is heavy, but it is also liberating. When responsibility is accepted fully, anger loses its target. There is no one left to blame. Blame is replaced by adjustment. Complaints are replaced by correction. Focus returns because the mind is no longer searching for escape routes. A story unfolds here, one that many people recognize but few articulate. A person wakes each morning intending to improve, yet ends each night disappointed. Not because progress is impossible, but because commitment dissolves at the first sign of resistance. The Stoics would not call this laziness. They would call it confusion about what matters. When you speak this fifth word in the morning, you remind yourself that values are not proven by intention, but by behavior under pressure. It is easy to claim discipline when conditions are ideal. It is revealed only when they are not. This refrains difficulty as opportunity. Each challenge becomes a chance to practice who you say you are. Focus sharpens dramatically here. You stop asking how to feel motivated and start asking what must be done. Emotion becomes secondary, action becomes primary. The mind simplifies because the standard is clear. There is less internal debate, less hesitation, less delay. This is also where self-respect is rebuilt, not through affirmation but through evidence. Each small act of alignment strengthens identity. You begin to trust yourself again. And a mind that trusts itself does not scatter easily. Anger often hides disappointment in oneself. When expectations are unmet, frustration seeks an external outlet. By reclaiming responsibility, you remove this displacement. You see clearly where adjustment is needed, and you make it without drama. The Stoics warned against wishing for an easy life. They urged wishing instead for the strength to endure a difficult one. This is not pessimism. It is realism infused with courage. When you internalize this in the morning, you stop resisting the weight of responsibility. You carry it with steadiness. There is a maturity that emerges here. You become less interested in how things appear and more concerned with how they are handled. You measure progress by consistency, not intensity. You value restraint more than expression. The story deepens as days pass. Mornings become quieter, not because life has become easier, but because the mind has become settled. You know what is required, you know what you owe yourself, and you are no longer negotiating with that knowledge. Discipline stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like structure. Structure supports focus, focus supports growth, growth supports peace. This chain, once formed, is difficult to break. By the end of this phase, something important has shifted. You are no longer trying to control the day. You are directing yourself within it. And that distinction changes everything. This fifth word anchors your identity. It reminds you that while you cannot command outcomes, you can command effort, attention, and integrity. And that is enough. By the time responsibility has been accepted without resistance, the mind begins to encounter a quality test, consistency. Not the dramatic kind that shows up in moments of crisis, but the ordinary, repetitive discipline of doing what is right when nothing is watching and nothing feels urgent. The Stoics believed this was the true measure of character. Greatness was not revealed in intensity, but in continuity. The sixth word you must tell yourself each morning speaks to this endurance. It reminds you that the mind does not drift into excellence. It is shaped slowly, through repetition. Most people abandon discipline not because it fails, but because it is boring. And boredom, to the untrained mind, feels like emptiness. To the Stoic, it is neutrality, a space where virtue can be practiced without interference. Anger often arises when expectations of progress outpace reality. You want change to feel dramatic. You want improvement to announce itself. But growth rarely does. It accumulates quietly, unnoticed, until it becomes undeniable. When you remind yourself of this in the morning, impatience loosens its grip. Focus deepens here because the mind stops chasing novelty. It no longer needs constant stimulation to stay engaged. It learns to remain with a task long enough for mastery to develop. This is a rare skill in a world addicted to speed, but it is one the Stoics considered essential. Marcus Aurelius warned himself against being dazzled by quick wins. He knew that virtue practiced only when convenient was not virtue at all. The morning word anchors you in this truth. It tells you that today's effort may look identical to yesterday's, and that this sameness is not failure, it is training. There is a quiet humility required for consistency. You must accept that progress may be invisible for long stretches, that no one may notice your restraint, your patience, your self-control. The ego resists this. It wants recognition. The Stoic releases this need. He understands that unseen discipline is the strongest kind. This shift has a calming effect on anger. When you are no longer demanding immediate results, frustration loses urgency. You stop pressuring the day to prove something. You allow yourself to work steadily, without emotional spikes. Consistency also stabilizes identity. You stop asking who you are in moments of emotion and start answering through repeated action. Each disciplined morning becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. Over time, these votes form a solid character. Mind becomes less reactive because it trusts the process. It does not panic at setbacks or become inflated by small successes. It stays the course. And staying the course is what most people fail to do. Focus becomes almost effortless here, not because effort is gone, but because resistance is gone. You sit down to work without drama. You face difficulty without complaint. You finish what you start because finishing is part of who you are. This is also where self-control matches. It is no longer enforced through willpower but supported by habit. You do not argue with yourself about distractions. You remove them. You do not negotiate with impulses. You observe them and let them pass. The Stoics understood that the mind becomes what it repeatedly practices. If it practices avoidance, it becomes anxious. If it practices restraint, it becomes calm. The morning word reinforces this truth daily, shaping the mind through repetition. There is a stillness that develops here, a sense of internal order. You are not rushing to escape discomfort or chase pleasure. You are present, and presence sharpens perception. You notice more. You waste less energy. Anger struggles to survive in this environment. It thrives on chaos, urgency, and impatience. Consistency removes all three. What remains is clarity and steady motion. As days turn into weeks, something subtle but profound happens. You begin to respect yourself not for your ambitions, but for your reliability. You become someone you can depend on. And self-trust is one of the strongest antidotes to inner turmoil. This is the discipline the Stoics admired. Quiet, repetitive, enduring, built not in moments of inspiration but in mornings that look ordinary. And it is here that the mind becomes truly resilient, not because it resists life, but because it moves through it without losing its shape. Utter consistency has shaped behavior and steadied the mind. Something unexpected emerges, restraint becomes natural. Not forced, not tense, but integrated. The Stoics believed this was the sign that discipline had moved from effort into character. You no longer resist impulses aggressively. You simply do not follow them. The seventh word you tell yourself each morning acknowledges this shift. It reminds you that true strength is quiet, that shouting, reacting, and proving are symptoms of inner instability. A disciplined mind does not announce itself. It operates with precision and economy. Most people associate self-control with suppression. The Stoics saw it as alignment. When values are clear, temptation loses persuasion. When purpose is steady, distraction loses appeal. Anger, in this stage, becomes rare not because circumstances improve, but because provocation finds no purchase. Focus now has depth. You are not just attentive, you are intentional. You choose what deserves your time and what does not. And because choice is deliberate, regret diminishes. Regret always follows impulsive living. There is also a shift in how you perceive others. You no longer expect them to behave according to your preferences. You see them as they are shaped by their own fears, habits, and limitations. This understanding softens resentment. Compassion replaces irritation, not out of sentimentality but realism. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that people act as they believe is right, even when they are mistaken. When you internalize this, anger loses its moral justification. You stop interpreting others' behavior as personal affronts. You see it as human imperfection. This clarity strengthens relationships. You respond instead of react. You speak with restraint. You listen more than you assert. Paradoxically, this makes your words carry more weight. Silence, when chosen, becomes authority. Discipline now supports peace rather than tension. You are no longer forcing yourself into shape. You have been shaped. The morning word reflects this maturity. It is less instruction and more reminder. Focus remains stable because the mind is no longer divided. Desire, duty, and action are aligned. You are not pulled in multiple directions. You move forward cleanly. There is also a reduction in inner noise, fewer arguments with yourself, fewer justifications, fewer emotional spikes. Life becomes simpler, not because it is easy, but because it is handled well. Anger, when it does appear, is brief and informative. It signals a boundary or a value, not a loss of control. You acknowledge it, extract the lesson, and let it go. There is no spiraling. This stage reveals the quiet confidence of Stoicism. You do not need external validation to feel grounded. Your stability comes from within, reinforced each morning through deliberate self-talk and consistent action. As the day unfolds, you move through it with economy. You waste less time, less emotion, less energy. You are present where you are, doing what you are doing without resistance. This is not detachment from life. It is mastery within it. You still care, but you care wisely. You invest where returns are real. By now the transformation is visible, not as intensity but as steadiness, not as emotion but as clarity. Others may describe you as calm, focused, or disciplined. You simply recognize yourself as aligned, and alignment is the Stoic ideal. A mind in harmony with reason. A life guided by principle rather than impulse. Only one thing remains now: integration. Making this way of being permanent, not occasional. At this final stage, nothing dramatic needs to happen, and that itself is the point. The Stoics did not believe mastery announced its arrival. They believed it revealed itself in how little noise remained inside the mind. By now, the morning words no longer feel like instructions, they feel like recognition. You are not trying to become disciplined. You are living as someone who is. The eighth word you tell yourself each morning seals this identity. It reminds you that the work is never finished, but it is no longer fragile. Discipline has roots now. It does not depend on mood, motivation, or circumstance. It operates quietly, even when you are tired, even when the world is chaotic. This is where many philosophies end with achievement. Stoicism ends with maintenance, because a strong mind is not built once. It is preserved daily. The Stoics understood that neglect, not failure, is what undoes most people. They warned that even a trained mind can drift if it stops paying attention. But attention now feels natural. You notice your thoughts without being consumed by them. You catch emotional reactions before they take control. You sense when ego is rising, when impatience is forming, when distraction is approaching. And because you notice early, correction is gentle instead of forceful. Anger, at this stage, rarely survives past awareness. It dissolves in the light of understanding. You see it as information, not identity. You ask what it reveals, not why it must be expressed. This alone changes everything. Focus becomes a background condition of your life rather than a peak state you chase. You are present by default. When attention drifts, you bring it back without judgment. There is no frustration in this return, just practice. Life continues to present difficulty. People still disappoint. Plans still change. Fatigue still appears. Stoicism never promised otherwise. What has changed is your relationship to these things. They no longer define the quality of your day. They are events, not verdicts. There is a quiet confidence in this, not arrogance, not indifference, but steadiness. You trust yourself to respond well, and trust removes fear. Fear is the root of most anger. When fear fades, calm follows. You also stop rushing toward the future. Discipline has anchored you in the present. You understand that this moment handled well is enough. Tomorrow will be handled when it arrives. This perspective lightens the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote that life is opinion. Not in the sense that nothing is real, but in the sense that your experience of reality is shaped by judgment. By refining judgment, you refine life itself. This is the deepest Stoic insight, and it now lives in you as habit. The morning words have done their work. They have rewired your inner dialogue from reaction to reason, from impulse to intention. You no longer need to repeat them loudly. They echo quietly in your choices. Discipline has become dignity, focus has become clarity, self-control has become freedom, and freedom to the Stoics was never the absence of limits. It was mastery within them. Each morning, when you rise, you do not ask what the day will give you. You ask how you will meet it. This single shift changes everything. You step into the day without armor because you no longer feel threatened by it. You move forward without hurry because you are not chasing validation. You act with restraint because excess no longer tempts you. This is not a perfect life. It is a governed one. And a governed life, the Stoics believed, was the highest form of peace available to a human being. The story does not end here. It repeats tomorrow morning, quietly, intentionally, one word at a time. And that is enough.